There's a specific window every single morning where your body quietly decides how your metabolism is going to behave for the next 16 hours, and most people blow right through it before they've even had breakfast. It's not a supplement. It's not a tea. And weirdly, it has almost nothing to do with what's on your plate. Most morning advice obsesses over food, what to eat, what to avoid, whether to fast, which juice supposedly resets your system. And food matters. We'll get to that. But researchers studying circadian rhythm, your internal 24-hour body clock, have found that the very first hormonal signals of the day are set by something most of us ignore completely: light. Skip that signal, and your cortisol, your appetite hormones, and your insulin sensitivity can drift out of sync before you've swallowed a single bite. That's why someone can eat a perfect breakfast, track every macro, and still feel like their metabolism is working against them all day. They nailed the food and completely missed the signal that was supposed to set the stage for it. So the real lever isn't one morning food or one detox drink. It's stacking 3 specific, evidence-backed signals in the first hour of your day: light, protein, and movement, that together tell your liver and your metabolism to actually get to work. Miss the stack, and you're starting the day already behind. Comment morning person or not a chance, depending on which one you actually are. I want to see who I'm talking to here. Here's why this particular window matters so much. The fat that collects around your organs, visceral fat, isn't inert. It behaves almost like its own signaling gland, constantly releasing fatty acids and inflammatory molecules into your bloodstream. Research consistently shows visceral fat is one of the strongest predictors of fat building up inside the liver itself. And once that happens, insulin resistance, elevated triglycerides, and long-term risk for type 2 diabetes and heart disease all climb with it. Large imaging studies have even linked higher visceral and liver fat to measurable changes in heart structure. In people who felt completely fine and had no idea anything was happening internally. Your morning is the one part of the day where your hormones are the most responsive to outside signals. Cortisol is naturally highest shortly after waking, and how you interact with that window, through light, food, and movement, has an outsized effect on how your body handles everything you eat for the rest of the day. Miss it consistently, and you can be doing everything right later: clean dinners, regular workouts, and still feel like your body isn't cooperating. So today, I'm walking you through 3 real, research-backed morning levers, not tips pulled from nowhere, but things measured in actual clinical studies with real participants and real blood work. Then I'm giving you the one multiplier that outperforms almost everything else for this specific type of stubborn fat, based on a direct head-to-head comparison researchers actually ran. And along the way, I'm going to bust one very popular morning liver detox myth that has basically zero human evidence behind it. So you stop wasting money on it and start putting that effort somewhere the data actually supports. Quick note on who's talking to you: I read the actual peer-reviewed studies, so you don't have to spend your morning doing it yourself. And I'll tell you clearly when something is well proven versus still early or preliminary. Standard disclaimer: I'm not your doctor. This isn't personalized medical advice. And if you have a diagnosed liver condition, diabetes, or a cardiovascular concern, talk to your physician before changing your routine. Let's get into it. There are 3 real morning levers connecting your habits to how your liver and your belly fat behave, and the first one is going to surprise you, because it's not something you eat at all. Mechanism 1. Morning light exposure. Your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that governs metabolism, hormone release, and energy, is set primarily by light hitting your eyes. And it's most sensitive to that signal in the first couple of hours after you wake up. A Northwestern University study tracking real-world light exposure found that people who got more bright light in the morning had a meaningfully lower BMI than people who got most of their light later in the day, and that link held up even after accounting for differences in diet, age, and activity level. The lead researcher put it plainly: light is the most powerful signal available for synchronizing the internal clock that regulates energy balance, and insufficient morning light exposure is associated with a body clock that drifts out of sync with metabolism. Lever A is simple. Get outside, or at least near a bright window, within the first hour of waking. For around 20 to 30 minutes, that's the range researchers used when they found the clearest effect on BMI. You don't need direct sun on your skin. It's light entering your eyes that matters for this specific pathway. Overcast days still work. They just take a bit longer. Lever B is timing your bright light before you're immersed in screens and artificial indoor lighting, which are dramatically dimmer than even an overcast sky. Early studies on light exposure and metabolic markers, including some looking specifically at glucose regulation, have found that brighter light earlier in the day is associated with better metabolic outcomes than the same amount of light later on. This research is still developing. Sample sizes in several of these studies are small, and researchers are careful to note more interventional trials are needed, but the direction is consistent enough across multiple independent research groups, from Northwestern to sleep labs studying shift workers, that sleep and circadian specialists now recommend it as a genuinely low-cost, low-risk habit worth adopting while the science continues to firm up. To be fully honest about what this is and isn't, morning light won't burn belly fat by itself, and no single study proves it causes weight loss on its own. Most of this evidence is observational, meaning it shows a strong pattern rather than airtight proof for every individual. What the evidence actually supports is that it helps keep your internal clock synchronized, which in turn supports more stable hormone release patterns throughout the day, cortisol rising and falling on schedule, melatonin production timed correctly at night, and that stable rhythm is the foundation everything else in this video builds on top of. Researchers studying shift workers and people with irregular light exposure have repeatedly found disrupted circadian rhythms associated with higher rates of metabolic problems, which is part of why sleep and circadian specialists take this signal seriously, even though the research is still developing. Mechanism 2. A protein-forward first meal. Here's the second lever. And this is where the food question actually comes in, just not the way most morning detox content frames it. What matters most about your first meal isn't some special ingredient, superfruit, or cleansing juice. It's the protein content, and how that specific macronutrient affects your blood sugar and insulin for the rest of the day. This is worth pausing on, because it's one of the most consistently replicated findings in nutrition research, even though it doesn't sound as exciting as a detox tonic. A clinical trial from the University of Missouri had women eat breakfasts with different protein amounts: a low-protein pancake meal versus egg and sausage meals with 30 or 39 grams of protein, and tracked blood glucose and insulin for 4 hours afterward. Both higher protein breakfasts produced meaningfully smaller glucose and insulin spikes than the low-protein, high-carb option, and the 39-gram breakfast outperformed even the 30-gram one. Separate research in people with type 2 diabetes found the same pattern. A high-protein breakfast produced a lower post-meal glucose response than a high-carbohydrate breakfast, even though total calories were matched. There's an added bonus. Researchers call the second meal effect. A randomized crossover trial found that eating a protein-enriched breakfast didn't just blunt your morning blood sugar, it also reduced the insulin spike from your lunch later that day, compared to skipping breakfast entirely or eating a low-protein one. In other words, this lever compounds forward through your whole day. Not just your morning. A good first meal is quietly setting up a better second meal too, hours before you've even thought about lunch. Lever A here is simple. Aim for 25 to 35 grams of protein at your first meal. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, or a protein shake all work. And you don't need to hit an exact number every single day for this to add up over time. Lever B is pairing that protein with fiber vegetables, oats, or whole fruit, rather than juice, which slows digestion further and extends the blood sugar stabilizing effect across the whole morning, instead of just the first hour after eating. Neither of these requires a special detox ingredient, a powder, or anything sold as a morning cleanse. It's the protein-to-carb ratio, plain and unglamorous, that the research keeps pointing back to, meal after meal, study after study. If you've been starting your day with just coffee and nothing else, Drop it in the comments, no shame. Just curious how common that actually is here. Mechanism 3. What your morning drink actually does for your liver. Now let's talk about drinks. Because this is where most morning liver detox content goes completely off the rails. And I want to set the record straight, since this is probably the single most oversold category in this entire topic. Lemon water and apple cider vinegar are two of the most commonly recommended liver flush morning drinks, and the honest answer is that neither has meaningful human evidence behind the specific claim that they detoxify your liver or burn belly fat. The studies that exist showing lemon juice protecting the liver were done in rodents given alcohol-induced liver injury, not in humans drinking lemon water at their kitchen counter. Apple cider vinegar has slightly more human data. Some small trials suggest a modest blood sugar blunting effect when taken before a carbohydrate-heavy meal, but multiple physician reviews are clear that there's no evidence it speeds up liver filtration or boosts detoxification in any measurable way. Your liver's actual detox machinery, called Phase 1 and Phase 2 metabolism, runs continuously using enzymes, regardless of what you drink alongside it. What does have more consistent human evidence is coffee. Multiple large observational studies have found regular coffee drinkers have a lower risk of fatty liver disease and liver fibrosis. And this shows up specifically with black coffee, rather than sweetened versions loaded with syrup and cream. Some research even suggests coffee compounds may help regulate liver enzyme activity and reduce inflammation markers over time in people who drink it regularly. This evidence is still observational rather than a guaranteed individual cause and effect, meaning it shows a strong, repeated pattern across large groups of people, rather than proof that your specific cup is doing something measurable tomorrow morning, but it's one of the more consistently supported morning drink habits that actually exists in the literature, which says something about how overhyped the detox drink category as a whole really is. The bottom line on drinks: hydration itself matters, because your liver's enzymatic processes function better when you're not dehydrated after 7 or 8 hours of sleep, so a glass of plain water first thing is a genuinely good habit, and it costs nothing. But no drink, however trendy, however many wellness influencers swear by it, replaces what your liver already does on its own every single day. If a lemon water or apple cider vinegar habit feels good to you and doesn't cause digestive irritation, there's no real harm in keeping it. Just don't expect it to be doing the metabolic heavy lifting some marketing claims it does. So that's light, and that's food and drink. But if you want the single biggest multiplier on this specific type of fat, there's one more piece, and it's the one people skip most often, because mornings already feel rushed. A randomized trial from Duke University Medical Center directly compared aerobic exercise, resistance training, and a combination of the two, measuring actual visceral and liver fat with imaging rather than relying on the bathroom scale. Aerobic exercise significantly reduced both visceral fat and liver fat and improved insulin resistance more effectively than resistance training. Resistance training alone showed no significant reduction in visceral or liver fat in that same study, still valuable for strength, just not the driver of this specific effect. A related Duke trial isolating the effect of exercise volume found that the group doing the most aerobic activity saw close to a 7% reduction in visceral fat, with a clear dose-response pattern. More consistent activity tracked with less visceral fat, independent of major diet changes. And timing it in the morning has a practical advantage worth mentioning. Exercising after an overnight fast before your first meal is when several studies have found fat oxidation is highest relative to carbohydrate burning, meaning your body preferentially taps into stored fat for fuel during that specific window. It doesn't need to be intense to count. This pattern shows up at moderate conversational pace intensities, not just in athletes pushing hard efforts. It's also worth explaining why this outperforms strength training specifically for visceral and liver fat. Since a lot of people assume more muscle automatically means less fat everywhere it counts. The mechanism researchers point to is that sustained aerobic activity increases the enzymatic machinery your body uses to mobilize and oxidize stored fat over a longer continuous window, than a typical strength session provides. Resistance training remains genuinely important for long-term metabolic health, bone density, and preserving muscle as you age. It's just not the primary driver of this particular effect, based on what the head-to-head data actually shows. Let's put the whole stack together into something you can actually do tomorrow morning. Step 1. Within the first hour of waking, get outside or near a bright window for 20 to 30 minutes. A coffee on the porch counts. Step 2. Eat a first meal with 25 to 35 grams of protein, paired with some fiber rather than something purely carb-heavy. Step 3. Move your body for even 15 to 20 minutes at a pace where you could still hold a conversation. A brisk walk is enough, and doing it before eating is a small bonus, not a requirement. None of these 3 steps need to happen at 5 a.m. in a specific order with a stopwatch. The research supports the cumulative habit, not a rigid ritual. So if your version is a walk at 8, breakfast at 8:30, and you got some daylight in the car on the way, that still counts. Start with just one of the 3 this week if all at once feels like too much, and layer in the next one once the first feels automatic. A realistic first week might just be the light exposure alone. Since it's the easiest to slot into an existing routine, open the curtains, take your coffee outside, walk the dog a little slower. Week 2, add the protein-forward breakfast. Week 3, layer in the short walk. By week 4, you're running the full stack without it feeling like a dramatic overhaul. One safety note: if you have a heart condition, are new to exercise, or manage diabetes, check with your doctor before changing your routine, especially around fasted movement or altering meal timing and composition significantly. Which one of the 3 are you missing right now? Light, protein, or movement? Comment the one you're going to add this week, and I'll check back in the replies. So let's close the loop on where we started. It was never really about a special morning drink or a detox trick. The research keeps pointing to something much less exciting and much more reliable. Getting real light into your eyes early, giving your first meal enough protein to blunt the sugar roller coaster, and moving your body before the day gets away from you. Stack those 3 consistently, and you're working with your biology instead of hoping a lemon water ritual does the work for you. None of this requires perfection, a strict schedule, or spending money on a single supplement. The studies behind every piece of this used ordinary light, ordinary food, and ordinary walking. Not anything you need to buy from a wellness brand's checkout page. That's the real version of the morning liver detox. If this helped you see what actually moves the needle, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.